All right, well, while the last couple of folks are getting settled here, I'm just going to kick things off by introducing our speaker. We are here today with Kun Zhang, who is actually currently at the Mohammed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence out in Abu Dhabi. So he's been generous enough to give us a little bit of his time on what is a Friday night for him. So thank you again for being here, Kun. He's an associate professor in the CMU Philosophy Department and also an affiliate faculty member in the Machine Learning Department. His research interests lie in machine learning and artificial intelligence, especially in causal discovery and causality-based learning. He develops methods for automated causal discovery from various kinds of data, investigates learning problems, including learning and deep learning from a causal view, and studies philosophical foundations of causation in machine learning. And his talk today is titled Causal Representation Learning and its Connection with Decision Making. So should be a good talk. And at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kun. Thank you, Kun.
Thank you very much, Norman. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So in this talk, I will focus on causal representation learning. You will see what I mean by causal representation learning and how to do it. At the same time, I will just explain how representation learning, or specifically causal representation learning, can facilitate reinforcement learning across multiple scenarios. So if you have questions, just feel free to interrupt me during the talk. Let me just start with some motivating examples. So why do we have to use causality, right? What can we benefit from causal modeling or causal thinking? So the first problem, right here, first example is very well known. Right here, on the right, we can see correlation between yellow fingernails and lung disease. But we know that if you want to change the incidence of lung disease, you have to go to the causes instead of the purely associative variables, right? So if you want to do interventions or if you want to achieve a goal by changing the system, clearly you care about the causality. So the second one is known as a symptom paradox. As you can see from here, this is a real data set. We have two patients with kidney stones. One of them has small stones and the other has large stones, as you can see from here. And we have two treatments. For each group, as you can see from the recovery rate, A seemed to be better, right? However, if you consider merge the data, then all of a sudden B seemed to be better, as you can see from the higher recovery rate. So now comes the problem, right? Suppose you're a doctor and suppose you only care about the recovery rate or the chance for the patient to recover. So would you recommend A or B? Some people may say, if I know the stone is small, I will recommend A. If I know the stone is large, I will recommend A. If I don't know, I recommend B. Basically, A or A is B, right? That's why it's known as paradox. But nowadays, we know it's not really paradox. Why? Because when you make a recommendation, you only care about only the causal influence of treatment on recovery, only this link, but not the associational information. So from observational data here, we only have associational information. But for the purpose of decision making, right, or treating diseases, we care about just the causal influence of the thing we can change on the target variable. So right here, if you have that in mind, you can identify the causal effect of treatment on recovery, then you can conclude that, yes, I should always recommend A, right? Even if I don't know the size of the stone. This is the second one. So basically, whenever we make a recommendation, since you have a purpose, you care about the causality, in order to achieve that goal. So the third one right here is kind of also real data derived from some real data set. Let's go back, say, to 50 years ago. Then maybe you would find that female college students were smarter than male students on average. Why? We believe that according to the population, the females and males are roughly speaking, right, equally smart. So why could you find that for college students, the female ones were smarter on average? Basically, this kind of problem is almost everywhere, especially nowadays when we work on international data collected on the internet. Whenever you work with data collected on the internet, you should be very careful because the sample you have might have very different property from the whole population you are interested in. In this case, you can see basically at that time, being admitted to college has two causes, both gender and IQ could be the causes. And given being admitted to college, gender and IQ, which were originally independent, will become dependent, right? As a consequence, gender and IQ are dependent, and then you can see some difference. But basically, this is because of selection. So essentially, there are only two ways to generate dependency in the data. One, to use causality, right? If A causes B or B causes A or A and B are caused by a common thing, say C, then that should be dependent. But in addition to that, we also have a selection process. Selection to be seem to be kind of overlooked in the literature, but selection actually can explain a lot of dependence across many scenarios, many disciplines, including biology and even kind of text language modeling and so on. Okay, so here basically this is what we can benefit from causal thinking with very simple examples. Now let's look at this modified cut-pull problem right here. Suppose now you have no idea about the underlying process. What you see is just the video, right? At the same time, you just want to keep the inverted pendulum right here balanced. That's the goal, but you don't know what, you have no idea what to do. We can only observe it. Now let's see. So you can see this video, you just see it. And then you want to see what to change in order to achieve your goal. In this particular case, you want to keep the pendulum balanced, right? And now we have to learn the underlying representations. We have to see the connection or the relationship between the underlying representations, right? Macro variables and the pixels. At the same time, we have to see what factors we have to pay attention to when we make decisions and so on. So basically, later you can see we have some results on this modified cut-pull environment. So at the very bottom, you can see we derived some state representation. On the very left, you can see, let me play them. They are reward relevant. So whenever you do reinforcement learning, in order to keep it balanced, you have to pay attention to two things. One is the location of the cut. The other is the angle, basically, of the cut-pull. So, and of course, if you care about the control, then you can see that in this case, what we can do is to control the position of the cut-pull or the pivot point right there. And in the middle, you can see right here, this is something you may be able to control given what kind of the setting of the environment. But in this case, the color of the light at the very bottom is not relevant to the reward. So you can forget about it, although you can control it. And on the very right, you can see this is basically the location of another cut-pull above the one we are interested in. It's there, it's moving, but it's not relevant. So we can see it. To solve this problem, you can see we try to see the underlying causal variables together with the dynamic causal model to explain what we see. Once you have the causal model, you know how to make a difference, right? You know, you can try to see what can be changed by your action, and you can foresee the consequences of action. And then you can see what to do in order to achieve the goal, to keep the pendulum balanced in this case. Okay, so now you can see why representation learning or causal representation learning is very useful if you want to deal with new problems without really understanding the underlying process. You can only collect raw data. So basically, you can see traditional use of causality is somehow circular. I know causal relations happen to A, B, C. I go there, I collect data for the variables. I try to see the causal influence or quantify the causal influence, right? But in practice, if you want to discover something new, what we can do is that follows. I go there, I try to collect all those variables that I believe are relevant to the things I care about, and then I try to analyze the data to discover what variables are causal, what variables should exist right there, but cannot be directly observed, right? And then can try to understand the system and then come up with a solution. Okay, so basically you can see for decision making, disease treatment, recommended systems, and even fairness in machine learning, domain generalization, domain adaptation, we care about the representation behind the data. And very oftentimes, if you want to say do intervention or change users' behavior, say in recommended systems, you have to find a causal representation learning in order to make sure the outcome is something what you want. And at the bottom, you can see another example. So this is a very kind of simple illustration of the adversarial vulnerability problem. At the very left, on the very left, you can see the panda. And then if you change a particular pixel in a specific way or add a noise, then the machine can say it's something totally different, right? So why do we have this phenomenon? Basically, you can show that as long as machines and human beings derive and make use of different kinds of high-level feature representations, we may always have this kind of adversarial attack problem. In some cases, machines can say it's something different, but we say it's the same. And in some other cases, we believe it's something different, but machines don't, right? So then next problem is what kind of feature representation or high-level representation we make use of, right? In order to make sure machines and human beings can really communicate with each other seamlessly, we have to figure out what kind of representation we make use of. Then we have to find a way so that machines can learn something consistent with what we use. So roughly speaking, we make use of kind of generative features or causal features to explain the external world, right? We have the mental activities to explain the external world and see the connections between different scenarios and so on. So that's why, roughly speaking, causal representation learning could be a very important problem if you want to achieve trustworthy or expandable AI, because those features could be high-level features, right? Used for decision making or even for prediction, could be consistent with what we have on our mind. Okay, so now how can we discover causality from observation data? Generally speaking, this is an inverse problem, right? I have a causal structure, causal model. In the hidden world, I cannot see it. I only observe data that was generated by the model. Now I want to recover information of the underlying causal model. How can we achieve that? So first of all, in order to solve this problem, we have to understand the footprint of causality lived in the data, right? Because without any information in the data that reflects causality, we cannot recover causality at all. So basically, all those methods for causal discovery or for learning causality from data can be understood as different instantiations of the so-called modularity property. Modularity property, in some ways, also known as exogeneity property in economics and independent causal mechanisms in machine learning. So basically, it says the following thing. Right here, we have an example. We have multiple variables: rain, wet ground, slippery. They're dependent. So although all variables can be dependent, if we have a causal view, we automatically have a modular representation. So here we know there's a process to generate rain, there's another process to generate wet ground from rain, and there's another process to generate slippery from wet ground. Although the variables are dependent, those modules or processes are not related to each other at all. Okay, they are kind of autonomous. And as a consequence, you can see conditional independence between rain, Z, and Y, slippery, given X. Okay, because there are no other way for them to be related. And furthermore, you can have independent condition where X, wet ground, would be independent from the noise term in the generation process for Y, right, from X, if X and Y do not share other latent common causes. So this is independent noise condition. And furthermore, if you allow the system to change, then you can see that you have the minimal change property or independent change property of a causal system. What does it mean? So suppose you just go to different conditions, right? And then say one or multiple modules can change. But if you have alternative representation to explain the distribution of the data across multiple environments, you can show that the alternative ones will not have fewer modules that change. So usually they have more. That means the causal system has fewer modules that are subject to changes. And furthermore, if they change independently because they don't share any information. The modules do not share any information. Okay, so here you can see the footprint of causality in data. The next question is how we can really guarantee that what to recover from data is consistent with the underlying truth, underlying code structure. So this is known as the identifiability problem. We have to show that under assumptions, some particular assumptions, the learned structure or model is consistent with the truth up to something, right? Very often times we have equivalence class, so we can only recover the underlying truth up to some relations. And in some situations, we can recover the underlying truth uniquely. Okay, basically, we care about identifiability. Well, otherwise, it's not going to be causal representation learning. There could be other types of representation learning. And here, let's have a look at the definition of causal discovery and the causal representation learning. Causal discovery is a kind of very broad task. So it's a way to discover the underlying causal structure or causal model by making use of observational data. So analyze the observational data, you try to recover the causal structure or causal model. And in some cases, the causal structure may have latent common causes, right? Latent variables. And you should indicate the existence of such latent variables or should locate them. And contrast, causal representation learning is focused more on high-level latent causal variables. Basically, we have two definitions of causal representation learning. With some other people, we are writing a book on causal representation learning. So the first definition says that in causal representation learning, we try to learn those hidden variables that are separately manipulable, at least potentially. So basically, if they are separately manipulable, what does it mean? It means they are involved in the underlying generating process. I can change one without changing any other, and so on. So that means equivalently, we can say those variables we can learn from data should be involved in the underlying data generating process so that we can mimic the generating process or control particular factors in the generating process. Okay, now let's have a look at the settings of the problem. Basically, we can consider three axes of this causal representation learning or even causal discovery problem. The first one is whether we have ID data or non-ID data. Generally speaking, we can benefit from non-ID data because if you have violation of either of those I's, you may even have temporal information or multiple distributions, then causality or discovering causality would be easier. Why? Because basically causality is about the changes. So the second axis is whether you can benefit from parametric constraints. In some cases, we have linear models, right? We can benefit from such constraints on the causal mechanisms. And last one is whether we allow a large number of latent confounders in the system. By latent confounder, I mean unobserved direct common cause of at least two variables, right? So for the purpose of causal representation learning, clearly we should allow latent confounders, otherwise it makes no sense. But in traditional causal discovery, very oftentimes we assume the system is causally sufficient without any latent confounder. Okay, so this is the problem setting. Now let's look at the classical methods to discover causality from data. Here you can see a summary of recent advances in causal representation learning. You can see different settings. On the very right, you can see what kind of results you can end up with, what guarantees you have. I will give examples to illustrate all those results in this table. So first example, right here you can see the first example. So this is data collected by my collaborator. So it's in archaeology, they try to understand why we, the human beings from different areas, look different. So they collect data, they measure the geographical location, climate, cranial size, cranial shape differentiation, and so on, and diet, and try to see how those factors influence each other, right? You can see in this case, we only have a single data set, and we cannot do any intervention, right? But we try to see the underlying causal factors to explain the difference. So this ID data, in this case, some variables might be even high dimensional. We have no idea about how they are related. So we don't have parametric constraints, and we may or may not have latent confounders. So right here, by making use of just conditional independence, you can recover the underlying causal graph up to some kind of equivalence class. So hello? Okay, I thought someone had questions. Good. So here, basically the assumption for this set of methods are as follows. First of all, you assume causal Markov condition. So if they are separated in the graph, then they are conditionally independent. And this is very natural. The other assumption is really crucial. is known as faithfulness assumption. It says that in the data, you cannot observe any extra or accidental independent relationship. So any independence or conditional independent relationship you can observe in the data is reflected in the graph. Okay, so under those two assumptions, here we can use the PC algorithm or FCI. With PC, we assume there are no latent confounder. With FCI, you don't have this assumption, but with FCI, you cannot really recover latent confounder. Instead, very often times you can just indicate the possible existence of latent confounders. Here you can see how PC works. By the way, PC stands for Peter Sbertis Clark Limmer. They invented the PC algorithm more than 30 years ago. So right here, this is how PC works. You have data on the very left. Then you can discover a set of independence or conditional independent relationship or constraints. And then you want to find a graph or set a graph to satisfy those constraints. That's why this method is known as the constraint-based. You can either show that if two variables are independent or conditional independent, they are shown to be an edge in between. Then you have skeleton. After you have a skeleton, you can detect the so-called weight structures. X2 and X4 are conditional independent, giving 1 but not 3. So this is the only possibility for them to be related. And then you can go further to avoid fake weight structure by doing error orientation propagation and so on. And in this case, we have this result. Some edges are directed, some edges are not directed. Okay, right here. So now the problem is how to determine the direction right here and how to deal with latent confounders. With FCI, you can do something, but generally speaking, the result of FCI, although always correct, may not be very informative, right? It may not really discover or recover the latent variables, not to mention the relation among the latent variables. So now let's try to answer the first question. How can we find a direction for each of those links? Before that, let's have a look at the result on the archaeology data right here. So this is the result of PC on the archaeology data. You can see now it's very clean. The geodistance is the cause of climate is the cause of cranial size, and so on. You can even distinguish between direct causal influences and indirect causal influences. Okay, so this demonstrates that causal discovery is actually smart in some way because it can help you recover the underlying causal structure under some assumptions. And then if you are willing to make some assumptions about the underlying causal mechanism, all of a sudden, even if you have only two variables without the time information, you can discover the direction, causal direction between them. So here, by assumptions on the causal mechanism, I mean some functional causal models. So here you can see 3 typical functional causal models, including linear non-Gaussian model, post nonlinear causal model, and additive node model right here. So let's have a look at the linear non-Gaussian model. You can see here y is generated from x in the linear way together with independent noise. Okay, because if x and y are not do not have latent compounder, then the noise should be independent. So we generate the data this way. Right here, you can see the scatter plot of x, y. And then if you try to explain the effect y in terms of the x, the cause, then you here know it's linear, you do linear regression, and then residual will be uncorrelated and also independent from the cause, as you can see from here, because you just try to recover the underlying truth. On the right, you can see if you try to explain the cause x in terms of y, the effect, now the residual is uncorrelated from the predictor, but clearly they are dependent. So this is a general phenomenon. If you have a wrong causal direction, or if they are latent, if they have latent compounders, then you can show that the residual must be dependent on the predictor or the hypothetical causes. This means we can really find a causal asymmetry between two variables. And two variable relationship is a fundamental one because you can always condition different variables so that you have two variable relationship in the causal graph. As a consequence, if you have solved the problem with two variables, you have the identifiability of the complete causal graph, no matter how many variables are involved. So this is the linear non-Gaussian model. Later, we make use of this model to identify the existence of latent variables and how latent variables are related. Good. So right here, up to now, I have talked about classical things. Now let's go further. So consider the following problem. In psychometric studies, they try to understand the personality. But unfortunately, you cannot directly measure personality. You cannot directly touch personality, right? You can only say, design some questionnaires, collect answer scores, and do analysis, and to try to understand the underlying personality dimensions, right? So right here on the right, you can see the questionnaire designed by those experts. Traditionally, they use Big Five personality test. Here by Big Five, I mean openness, right? Ocean, OCEAN. O is for openness, C is for conscientiousness, E is for extroversion, and so on. Now, let's just apply some method to the data right here, to the raw data, the answer score to 50 questions to see what we can discover. In other words, we allow latent confounders, and we believe latent confounders can be related. So here we have answer scores. They could be generated from latent variables. The latent variable can be related. Now let's see how we can just recover the hidden world, including hidden variables and all the causal relations. Later you can see we can make this structure more general, right? You can even have a causal influence from measured variables to hidden variables. It could be completely flexible. For now, let me just focus on two specific cases. The first one is the linear non-Gaussian case, and the other is the linear Gaussian case. Let's see what we can get. General nonlinear case could be rather complicated. We have some results. Right now, the result is kind of tedious. At some point, you can talk to students to learn more about how to deal with latent confounders in the general nonlinear situation. Okay, so before talking about the methods to deal with the latent confounders in the linear non-Gaussian case, let's have another look at independent noise condition. Basically, this is very simple. Suppose Z causes Y without a latent common cause for them, then the regression residual of Y, of regressing Y on Z, which will provide estimate of the underlying noise term in the causal model, should be independent from the predictor Z, as you can see from here, right? So regression residual is independent from Z. And if the causal direction is wrong, or if they share some latent common causes, we can show that the regression residual will not be independent from Z. That's it. Then, by making use of this condition, you can discover causal order. For instance, here, 2 must be causally earlier than 3. 2 must be causally earlier than 1, and so on. Once you find the causal orders, you can just discover this graph by making use of that regression with sparsity constraints. So this is independent condition. Remember, it's about the independence between linear combination of some of the measured variables and some measured variables. Now we can go further. We can have a way to deal with latent confounders or latent variables in the same way. We define the generalized independent condition, or GIN, right here. Basically, we say ordered variable pairs Z and Y follows the GIN condition if and only if there exists non-zero linear combination of the Y variables that is independent from Z. Y and Z are two sets of variables, measured variables. Okay, so now it's very simple. It's all just about independence between linear combination of variables and some other variables. And now we can see independent noise condition is a special case, right? Because in the independent noise condition case, the residual is also linear combination of some of the measured variables. And we were talking about the independence. It's interesting that graphically speaking, if this condition holds true, we have the following characterization. So if this condition holds true, then the latent common cause of Y can separate Y variables from Z variables. Okay, now this is a graphical condition. Now we can draw, by making use of a graphical condition or graphical interpretation, we can discover graphical information from data, right? First of all, we can discover where the latent variables are. In other words, we can discover which variables share latent common causes and the dimensionality of the latent common causes. And furthermore, we can find the causal orders over the latent variables. And if needed, you can go further. You can try to estimate the coefficients to recover the whole causal model. Okay, here you can see application. So we apply the method to the t-shirt burnout data. Right here on the right, in total, there are 28 measured variables. On the right, this is the hypothesized model given by experts. there are 28 variables. They, in their hypothesized model, you can see a lot of latent variables and how the latent variables are related to each other. Okay, and on the left, this is the result given by the method based on the gene condition. So basically, we recover the same latent variables from data, and also we recover the same causal orders. This verifies two things, right? First of all, the hypothesized model given by experts is very good because it can nicely explain the data. On the other hand, you can see computational method could be very useful if you want to discover the hidden world by making use of the model. Okay, you can go further. You can even recover this hierarchical structure by making use of this condition. And I just talked about linear non-Gaussian case. Linear non-Gaussian setting is very interesting because it is clearly more informative by making use of higher order statistics. However, at the same time, we know the higher order statistics could be very sensitive to large values, right? And in many cases, you may just want to make use of the second order statistics. So now let's have a look at what we can do in the linear Gaussian case by making use of only the second order statistical information in the data. Again, we want to discover latent variables and the relations among the latent variables, and also relations between latent variables and measured variables, and so on. So observe the following thing, then you can immediately see that, yes, we can say something about the latent variables. Consider this graph right here. If you consider the cross-covariance matrix between x10 and 11 right here, and all the remaining variables, you will see that this cross-covariance matrix has a low rank. In fact, the rank is only 1. Why? Because they are separated from all the remaining variables via a single variable. There's just one way for them to be related to the other set of variables. And this indicates that there should be a variable right here, latent variable right here. So this is the low rank deficiency, rank deficiency. So the cross-covariance matrix is rank deficient, and this indicates something. Right, it indicates that there's a bottleneck representation right there. And with this idea and some kind of tricky search procedure, we can recover the whole graph up to the equivalence class right here. Here we assume that measured variables are generated from latent variables, but you can go further. You can allow any of those variables to be latent or observed. So the structure could be completely flexible. Of course, the hierarchical structure is a special case. Why can we do that? It's just because even a conditional independent test, or in particular, partial correlation test, is a special case of the rank deficiency condition. Why? Let me give one explanation. So right here, we have two sets of variables, A and B right here. In this case, A and B share one variable, which is x2. Suppose this rank is 1. What does it mean? It means that A and B are related only via one kind of bottleneck variable. X2 is already shared. So this is equivalent to the condition that X1 and X3 are conditionally independent given X2. Now you can see, yes, with rank deficiency, you can also include conditional independent tests over the measured variables as a special case, but this condition is much more general, and you can allow measured variable and latent variable to be anywhere. You can allow relation among the latent variables, relation among the measured variables, and relationship, causal relation between the two different types of variables. Now let's look at the results on the dataset, the psychometrics dataset. Here, remember, we have 50 questions right here. O questions, openness, C questions right here, E questions. So this is the result. Now you can see we automatically discover the 6 latent variables, as you can see from here. And essentially, the questionnaires are kind of reasonable because roughly speaking, you can see they have different latent variables, or they basically form different clusters. That's good. One question actually is related to 2 dimensions. This question is, I spend time reflecting on things. It seems to be related to openness and also neuroticism. Okay, that's good. But now we have better understandings of the underlying process. For instance, let's look at this part, the left part. In psychometric studies, they just say, oh, this is openness. Now you can see we have detailed understanding. There are 3 latent variables here. And if you have a close look, you can see L4 is about imagination right here, imagination, and L6 is about understanding. And L5 is about coming up with ideas, so creativity. Now you can see when we say openness, we actually mean multiple things. At least openness consists of imagination, understanding, and creativity. And it seems that imagination and understanding are causes of creativity right here, as you can see from this cluster. Those variables are hidden, but we can try to understand them based on how they are related to the measured variables. Okay, so if you would like to have a kind of more detailed information, let me know. I will share the paper with you. Good. So up to now, I have talked about how to discover latent variables and their relations in the ID case. We have a single distribution. We don't really have much information, right, to make use of. As a consequence, usually we make some parametric constraints, assumptions. So specifically, I just talk about linear case. For discrete cases, it's almost the same. So the condition would also apply. In the general nonlinear case, it's more difficult. Now let's go further. You can see that if you violate either independent, either of those two I conditions, right? You can violate either independence or identical distribution assumptions, and then you can recover the underlying representations in a more reliable way, and you can even have kind of general functional form without assuming any parametric forms for the functions. This is the first setting. The problem setting is as follows. We have time series data, and we can put them here. They are assumed to be just invertible, nonlinear, non-invertible transformations of the underlying latent processes, ZIT, right here. ZIT are temporally related, right? They are latent processes. They can correspond to different objects, right? And this G function is invertible. Then you can show the following thing. Even if the function G from mixing or generation and the causal relations among the latent processes Z are completely non-parametric under rather mild assumptions, the latent processes can be recovered up to a component-wise transformation, meaning that each latent process can actually be recovered from the observational data, like video data. Now let's see one application. So here we have video data as the input. On the left, you can see this is a video. Let me play it. So we have 5 balls with different colors, and between some pairs of the balls, there's a hidden spring. So they are related. With this video data as input, the method discovered 10 latent processes. It turns out that they are just the X and Y coordinates of the 5 balls. At the same time, you can also recover how they are related, the time-related causal relations, right? So now you can see we have an automatic way to discover the latent processes, meaningful latent processes from observational data, as long as the mapping is invertible. Very recently, we dropped the assumption that the mapping G generating process is invertible, because for us, right, very often times we may have occlusion or other issues in the generating process. Nevertheless, generally speaking, you can still recover the underlying latent process. Why? It's because we assume that the latent processes are temporally related. Z1 could influence Z2 and so on, but there are no instantaneous influence, right? If the resolution is high enough, there shouldn't be instantaneous influence. This is the only crucial assumption underlying this work. And you can go further. So in deep reinforcement learning, right, we try to achieve interpretability, and we try to find meaningful latent representations, and we try to generalize well, and so on. So as you can see from here, so when you drive, right, you pay attention to other factors, although you cannot control them. At the same time, you want to make it very clear what you can control, and you want to see the consequences of the actions. But we may just have video as input. What can we do? So in this work, we just try to learn meaningful representations, state representations from raw input. We categorize the different kinds of state representations depending on whether they are controllable, as you can see from here, and whether they are reward relevant. Basically, for reinforcement learning, you only care about the state representations that are reward relevant. But unfortunately, some of them now are not controllable. Okay, so right here on the right, you can see the graphical representation. The state generates observations, and they also they generate a reward and so on. So this is the representation, and you can see how we can categorize different state representations. In total, there are 4 different types of state representations. So then, to solve the problem, first of all, we have to go from the graphical characterization to conditional independent relations, or the conditions involving. Oh, sorry, give me 1 second. Oh, give me 1 second. There's some problem with the charger. Okay, so on the right, you can see the graphical representation, and you can just see the conditional independence or dependent relations involving those state representation and action and reward. And then you can just estimate each of those categories of the representations by enforcing a certain type of conditional independence or dependent relations. That's it. And furthermore, you have identifiability. So if the generating function in the generating process from the state representations to the observed state raw input and reward function, now rewards is invertible and smooth, then you can recover each of those 4 categories up to a kind of block-wise transformation. So each block or each type is recoverable up to its own subspace. Okay, then you can do model estimation and policy learning in an iterative way. The details. Now you can see the result on the modified color pool problem, which was introduced at the very beginning. So here we modify the color pool problem. There's a distractor at the very top. This one is you can see this color pool move around, but we are not interested in this color pool at all. So it's a distractor. At the same time, the color can change, and now you can see what we can discover from data. So this is the value of the average R squared for the original state representation for the 4 types of state representations. As you increase the training steps, you can see the quickly go increase, and eventually the value is almost 1. As you can see from the 2 confusion matrices on the left, each of those latent, each of those 4 categories can be recovered in a very good way, right? The R square is almost 1. So at the bottom, you can see right here, this is, if you see the video, you can see right here, this corresponds to the pivot, position, basically the cut position right here, the position of the pivot point. Of course, it's controllable and also it's relevant to the reward. And this one is the angle of the pole. You cannot directly control it in this case, but clearly when you make a decision and when you try to achieve balance, you have to pay attention to the angle of the pole. And this one is the color of the light at the very bottom. You can control it, but it's not relevant. You can forget about it. The last one is completely irrelevant, is the distractor. You can discover each of those categories. So here you can see how the episode return changes along with the environment steps. So it's about how the performance changes as you interact with the environment. With the reward relevant representation, with the blue one, you can see basically the return changes increases the fastest, as you can see from here. So it's good because you have a compact representation. You just pay attention to the essential part in order to learn good policy. Okay, so now let me just finish this within 5 minutes, 5 or 6 minutes. Now let's look at the last setting. You have independent but non-identically distributed data. In other words, you may have non-stationary data or heterogeneous data. Now, what can we do? First of all, we know that causal modeling and distribution shift are heavily coupled, right? And here, by changing the causal model, I mean the following thing. Causal links or causal influences can be stronger or weaker, and sometimes they can even vanish, right? So this is why the distribution can change across different locations or different conditions or over time. And then we can benefit from one thing. We know that if they change, we have minimal changes, and even if they change at the same time, they change. The different modules will change independently. Okay, so this is what we can benefit from distribution shift. Then once you observe distribution shift, you can try to verify which causal model can produce the data under the independent changing property. Okay, so first of all, let's try to have a method to discover causality from data collected across multiple conditions or non-stationary data. There are a number of tasks. First of all, you may want to determine for which variables the causal mechanism, local mechanism changes. We can easily do that. And then you want to find a causal skeleton to avoid the spurious connection. And you want to find the causal direction. So here, in addition to the classical rules to find the causal direction, we can also benefit from the properties of independent changes in the causal system. And if you want, you can also find a low-dimensional representation of the change in the causal mechanism. Why? Because you can just find a low-dimensional representation of the conditional distribution corresponding to the causal mechanism that change. Okay, now I'm not going to give the application of this method for the purpose of discovery. Instead, let's see how we can use this method for domain adaptation. We know in domain adaptation, right, we have source domains where we have XY pairs. We would like to predict Y from X. And then we have a target domain. In the target domain, we don't have X. We want to predict Y. So at first glance, you may say this problem is not well defined, right? Because there could be so many ways for the distribution to change across domains. In other words, you have to assume something. So for instance, here, you have to assume that there's a high-level representation which is stable, and then consider this one as a bridge, and then you can just jump from one distribution to another via the bridge. Okay. In other words, some representation, general representation will be very essential if you would like to do automated domain adaptation. Here's one particular work. So in this work, basically the setting that follows, you have multiple source domains, you want to make prediction in the target domain. Here we assume that there are kind of influences among the measured variables, the features and the target variable Y. And then we can find a compact representation of how the joint distribution can change. In this augmented graphical representation, if you have a theta variable into a particular variable, say x2, it means that the conditional distribution of x2 given its parents can change. At the same time, we automatically enforce the condition of minimal changes. So if there's only one module that should change, then in this result, clearly you are not going to have extra changes. And at the same time, they change independently. So this augmented graph to represent how the joint distribution can change across domains in a compact way. And after that, domain adaptation is nothing but the problem of inference in this graphical model, given the values of the features and also priors on the latent variables of theta, because theta governs how strong or how the conditional distribution can change. Now you can see you have a principled way to do domain adaptation by making use of the property of the changes. Later you can see the limitation of this method. For now, let's see the result on number of datasets. So it's not surprising that on a lot of datasets you can see the accuracy, prediction accuracy in the target domain is so much better. Why? Basically, you automatically find a stable high-level representation, and then you make use of it together with the data in the target domain. You find a posterior distribution of the target variable given the features, right? It seems to be a very sensible way to make use of the information automatically. However, here we assume that the change relations happen to the measured variables. In many cases, that may not be the case. For instance, illumination condition can change, right? If you take pictures, say, at different times in the day, then how can you automatically discover such changing factors? In other words, the change in the distribution may be a consequence of the change in some latent factors. So in this work, you can see the measured variable like image pixels can be written as a fixed function of some underlying factors, right? So you can think of G as a way to produce the observed image from some kind of underlying things, including illumination condition, angle, concept, relation, and so on. So we assume that only a small number of the latent factors ZS could have changing distributions. And then you can show that those changing variables, ZS, can be identified up to component-wise transformation. And furthermore, the invariant part across domains can be identified up to the subspace. And now you can see by trying to recover how the underlying changing factors change across domains, you can align them and you can do a domain adaptation in an automatic way. So this is the idea. So basically the idea is to have a compact representation of the change in the distribution across domains. Okay, so furthermore, you can use the same idea to deal with the reinforcement learning to achieve adaptive reinforcement learning. So in this work, basically you can see you may have a change right here. You may have a change in the generating process of the measured variables like pixels from the underlying state, or you may have a change in the dynamic process, or you may have a change in the reward function, right? With this method, you can automatically locate the change, and then you can make the policy adaptive to such changes. So that's why the title of the paper is what, where, and how to do adaptation in transfer reinforcement learning. Essentially, you benefit from the compact representation of the changes. Okay, the last thing I would like to mention is kind of interesting and related to the minimal change principle I just discussed. This is the image-to-image translation problem. So right here at the top, you can see a lot of images taken in the summer. At the bottom, you can see a lot of images taken in the winter. We don't have paired data. You have no idea about the pairing information. Instead, now you are giving a particular image taken in the summer, and you are required to produce the counterpart of this image taken in the winter. So how can we really find the pairing information? Mathematically speaking, this is like going from the marginal distributions to the joint distribution, right? Because you like to see how different, how the data are aligned across the two domains of data sets. So clearly the problem is yield-posed, right? Because there are so many ways to draw the correspondence information. Here, once again, we assume minimal change. Specifically, we assume that the change in the image can be explained by a minimal number of changing variables, known as style variables. And then you can show that under this condition, together with some other regularity conditions, you can show that, yes, the mixing procedure is identifiable, and as a consequence, the joint distribution across multiple datasets is also identifiable. And then you can see you can do image translation, or you can do multi-domain data generation. Here, let me just show the result of multi-domain generation. Right here, we are given two separate images. One corresponds to the female, and the other corresponds to the males. Okay, you don't have pairing information in this case. Clearly, we don't have that, right? So on the left, you can see this is how we can generate two pictures with the same gender, but with the different genders, but the same content. We don't know exactly what the content is, but you can see right now, we really have minimal change. They look like the same person, but with different genders, right? With other methods, you can see some actual changes right here. So they are not really kind of clearly aligned. So with this example, I try to explain that identifiability is really important, and causal principles are really important in order to make sure that you just change what you should change, but not kind of anything else. To summarize, many learning problems involve suitable representation of data. From decision making involve the causal representation, right? Because you have to find the right way to you have to find the right causal model, and then you can see how to make a change to achieve your goal. And furthermore, causal representations can be recovered under appropriate assumptions. And this involves two things. The first thing is to come up with formulate causal principles, and then make the principles technically operational. After that, you need to establish identifiability conditions of the original causal truth, right? And finally, it's worth noting that in the non-IE case, generally speaking, we have very strong identifiability even without the parametric forms for the generating process. And in the ID case, generally speaking, we have to assume something on the mechanism in order to achieve identifiability. Okay, thank you very much. It seemed to be too dense.
Let's thank our speaker.